So the Las Vegas Raiders had a very, very interesting game just a couple days ago in which we learned a lot about that offensive line. We learned about some of the linebackers. And we're going to spend some time on both of those positional units in this video today. Lockie Tossie looked really, really, really impressive. And some people want him to start for the Raiders, which I think is maybe a little bit premature. But we're going to talk about that in this video. We'll watch some tape as well. I'm excited about this one. So obviously the Raiders had a really, really interesting game against the Seattle Seahawks 2 days back. And in that game, one of the things that I think a lot of people felt was that the offensive line wasn't great. Guys like DJ Glaze did not overly impress. Guys like Jordan Meredith did not overly impress. Darren Munford was absolutely terrible. Caleb Rogers, Charles Grant, those guys are not ready to start either. So a lot of people are kind of disappointed with what we saw, and you have the right to 100% be disappointed, because I was as well. To me, I wanted to see a big step up from DJ Glaze, and I did not see that. And it's not just Glaze. I'm not nitpicking just him. Jordan Meredith, he didn't really generate a lot of movement, and I understand he's trying to learn that new position of center. It's not going to be great, right? This is kind of what you're going to get with the Raiders offensive line. And of course, Colton Miller, Dylan Parham literally played 4 snaps. First team unit, right, the complete unit, 4 snaps, so it wasn't a whole lot of snaps. But it still wasn't great, even when guys like Meredith and JPJ and DJ Glaze kind of got that extended look. You would have still expected for big lanes to kind of pop, especially in the run game, and we didn't see that. And Pete Carroll kind of talked a little bit about this yesterday. He said we didn't get going, talking specifically about the run game. He said we were real basic. We ran the most fundamental plays you could run. In our format of going through the preseason, it will continue to be pretty basic just to keep our edge for the openers in the first 3 to 4 games. Teams don't know who we are, so you're going to have to find out as we go. We were real basic, and we didn't get the kind of movement we wanted. There's 2 things I kind of want to talk about with what Pete Carroll's saying here. First and foremost, the Raiders ran basic formations, and that's a very important thing to kind of understand. When Chip Kelly gets out here and he's going to call a play, when the Raiders offense kind of breaks that huddle, you're going to get 3 wide receivers to run to the right, 1 wide receiver run to the left. You'll get a running back in the backfield. And before anything happens, the quarterback's going to say, switch, right? He'll give some sort of keyword. And although it looks like it's a 1-by-3 formation or 3-by-1 formation, they're going to switch that. And then they'll get into the real formation they're going to run. And it'll be a 2-by-2. They'll have a running back in the backfield. And then they'll put a guy into motion as well. And then they'll run. Maybe it's an inside zone. There's going to be a whole lot of movement pre-snap that the Raiders will run with Chip Kelly. I say all that because the Raiders didn't do any of that in this first game. They came out literally in shotgun every single play. Did not put any guys in motion. Did not switch up the formation at all. They literally did nothing besides they kept it basic. So if the Raiders did not overly impress, it was because of the fact that they kept it basic. Now, the other thing Pete Carroll does state in his statement is that we didn't get the kind of movement that we wanted to ultimately get. And that part of it is a little concerning for me. When I watch great offensive lines, one of the things they do is they move people. They move people at the point of attack. So Darren Munford multiple times had a guy outside of him, and he would make contact with this guy, but there's no movement. And when you're trying to run zone plays, that tackle, the guy on the front side, has to move people. Darren Munford did not do that. But again, that's Darren Munford and not Colton Miller. So I'm not overly, worried about that. You look at DJ Glaze. There was one play specifically, it was Ashton Jeanty's first carry. He didn't really generate a whole lot of movement either. In fact, he ended up getting beat to the inside. It was one of his 2 losing snaps. Those plays are definitely a bit concerning given that was a backup defensive end that he was going up against. But again, we also have to recognize this is the first time these guys are kind of getting out there. And also, this is not necessarily the starting unit. There's no motions. The guy might know kind of what's coming. So again, I'm not overly concerned, and I'm not ready to panic at this point. I think the Raiders just need to really, the next time they kind of get out there, let these guys play 20 snaps to kind of see what they can do. Another thing to note is that the Raiders do have a scrimmage kind of coming up here against the 49ers. And Pete Carroll even told us that there's a good chance that the Raiders, in that game specifically, there's a good chance they're going to kind of get that extended look. And I think that game against the Niners, given, if they start their first team unit, that's the game to overreact. If there's a preseason game to overreact, that would be the game, right? But I also do think that, keeping it basic, understandable, you don't want to kind of show teams what you're trying to do. I also do worry a little bit just about the movement aspect of things. If you run duo, if you run power, if you run outside, inside zone, movement is still, still movement. You still got to move people, right? And a Pete Carroll saying we didn't really get a whole lot of that. So that's something they'll have to work on. That is something I think they'll get better at. But there's also one other thing that I kind of want to talk about. Pete Carroll was asked the question about Jordan Meredith and Jackson Powers-Johnson. How do these guys look to you, Coach Carroll? He said that both of those guys did get a good look because we wanted to really have a lot of film on them. It's a good first step. I thought Jordan Meredith was in command of what was going on in a difficult situation. We wanted to see how far he could go with handling the noise and the silent count and all of that kind of stuff. And he did a good job of that. We're not ready to make any declaration on anything. We just got to keep on working. So there's a couple of interesting pieces with what Pete Carroll has to say in relation to that battle that's kind of going on. We thought the battle was over. Most of us kind of thought that the fact that Jordan Meredith is now 100% exclusively at center with the first team unit and JPJ is kind of playing right guard, we thought the battle was kind of over at this point. But it does look like Pete Carroll saying that we're not ready to make a declaration on anything, which means he's not ready to fully commit to one guy or the other. And I'm not surprised, to be honest with you guys. Again, watching Jordan Meredith, listening to Pete Carroll saying we didn't get the movement we wanted. The movement, although it does start with the tackles, if the tackles get stopped at the point of attack, right, if they're not able to generate movement and widen those gaps, the center can still widen the gap. The center can take, the one technique or the three technique, and he can toss his ass up out of there. And the running back, let's say, outside zone to the left, there's no movement by the tackle, can bend it back to the inside, and your center can get that movement kind of going. And the thing that happened with the Raiders was there was no movement anywhere. The tackles weren't moving guys. The center wasn't moving guys. There was literally no gap for the running back to ultimately hit. And there were a lot of those type of plays out there. And for Pete Carroll to say we're not ready to make a declaration on anything, it could also mean that the Raiders feel like, hey, maybe we need to take a step back and we need to really rethink having Jordan Meredith as the starting center. Now, obviously, do recognize Colton Miller will move people at the point of attack. I think generally speaking, DJ Glaze should also be able to move people, if as he kind of gets comfortable. He's shown in the past that he can. I still think putting Jackson Powers-Johnson just kind of opens up cutback options for the running back. Some people have said, is it possible for Lockie Tossie to also kind of get an opportunity? And, I like Lockie Tossie. I think he has so much potential. And truth be told, this guy's tape really, really, really impressed me. Last year we had David Agoa. He did absolutely nothing, showed no upside, showed no potential. But Tossie, on the other hand, showed major, 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 major potential. And I don't say that just to hype a guy up. The guy was literally crushing people. He was throwing people. He was putting people down. He was anchoring down when he probably should not be. And he actually looked really good out there. And you could kind of see the strength and the potential with the strength and power. Now, obviously, he was raw and it wasn't perfect from a technique standpoint. So that's something a coach, an offensive line coach, will have to work on with him. But there are some elements to his tape where long-term I think he can develop into a starting caliber player. Now, I don't think he'd probably be ready to play this season at all. Even going into next season, we'd have to kind of see where he's at with the development. But like 2 years down the line, this guy could actually have he could actually have a real possibility of starting for the Raiders, given he's so damn strong, he has so much power. And it was on full display, obviously, against the Seattle Seahawks. Similar to Charles Grant, Charles Grant showed so great movement, in my opinion, that you can look at that and say there's real potential, there's real upside with Charles Grant. And I think for the Raiders, as we just kind of go forward, let those guys develop. Those guys aren't ready to start, in my opinion, today. I think the best thing the Raiders can do with that offensive line right now is keep it as it is right now, right? Just keep it as it is. You can swap Jordan Meredith for Kappa and put JPJ out the opposite position if you want to do that. But keep every other guy the same. Don't make any sort of drastic change and roll forward into the season with that unit, and let's see what these guys can actually do. Now, we do also have to recognize, there is a possibility that DJ Glaze is not good. There's a possibility Jordan Meredith is not good. There's a possibility Dylan Parham struggles a little bit as well, and the offensive line just isn't good. The Raiders win like 5 or 6 games. there's a real possibility that that ends up happening. I do think that as far as this offensive line can potentially take us is how far the Raiders will actually end up going this season. So that's just something to kind of keep an eye on. I also do want to switch focus, and I want to talk a little bit about the Las Vegas Raiders linebackers because, I think what we saw from Jamal Adams in this game was really, 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 really impressive. But I also think watching some of the other linebackers, it has me scratching my head, man. I'm not sure at what point the Raiders said Landon Roberts should be the starting linebacker for the Raiders. I don't know at what point they decided that that's the guy. To me, Landon Roberts, I'd be shocked if he even makes his team based off of that first game. And we'll talk about him specifically in a second. But let's talk about Jamal Adams first and foremost. The guy was absolutely incredible. And he even talked, he had his presser earlier today. He even talked a little bit about, I got into the building and, I didn't ask Pete Carroll if I could be a linebacker. We didn't have a conversation about it. Pete Carroll literally looked right at me and said, your ass is playing linebacker today or for the Raiders this season. And he was cool with it, right? He talked about how he's only ever played safety and running back, over the course of his playing career. But for him, playing linebacker and safety isn't a huge difference. It's pretty much the same. The only real difference is kind of where you're lining up in the vision aspect of it. Obviously, as a safety, it's a little bit further. Linebacker's a little bit different. The reads are also going to be a little bit different. For a linebacker, you got to read through the offensive lineman to the running back. As a safety, you're not really reading the offensive lineman, right? You're kind of just reading what's happening with the quarterback, the backfield. Maybe you read the tight end, right? I think some safeties say they read tight ends. To me, when I look at the Las Vegas Raiders linebacking group, Jamal Adams absolutely dominated. And here's another thing to note. A lot of people are saying, hey, the Raiders are going up against a bunch of backups. Drew Lock, yes, he's a backup quarterback. I don't even know if Sam Darnold's better than Drew Lock, truth be told. I watched J.J. McCarthy a little bit, and I almost think there's something with that coach of the Minnesota Vikings, right, that head coach. Maybe Sam Darnold's not even that good, right? Who knows? Maybe he's not that much better than Drew Lock. So, yeah, Drew Lock's a backup quarterback. That's great. But he's a good backup quarterback, right? He's a high-end backup quarterback. And the Seahawks actually had their starting offensive linemen in, believe it or not, or at least some of their starting offensive linemen. I know people are saying that, hey, they weren't starters or whatever, but they had Abe Lucas in at right tackle. They had Gray Zabel in at left guard. Those are two starting linemen for the Seahawks this season. And then they had Anthony Bradford at right guard, who I don't think he's going to win the job, but he's competing to start at right guard with the guy they drafted last year, I believe in the second round, Haynes, I forget his first name, but he's a guard. I think he's going to start for them at right guard. Yeah, technically, Bradford was a backup right guard, but he's kind of, potentially in battle with Haynes. Their center and left tackle were backups, but their left tackle was starting for the Ravens literally 2 years ago. But it's one of those things where that offensive line wasn't such backups that, if you watch the Raiders, defensive linemen maybe not be able to shed super quickly. If Zach Carter or if Jonah Laulu didn't look good, maybe it's because Gray Zabel's a first-round pick and was my number one interior offensive lineman coming out of this past class. Maybe that's what kind of happened out there. Maxx Crosby didn't overly flash, but Abraham Lucas is a pretty damn good right tackle. Now, I'm not saying Abraham Lucas shut down Maxx Crosby, but I think Abraham Lucas is one of the best tackles in the NFL. Had he not had the major knee injury he had 2 years ago, he hasn't played in literally 2 years. He played a little bit last year at the end of the year. But I think Lucas is going to end up becoming really, really good as well. And, I say all this because those linebackers, those guys that were lining up at the edge positions, right? Like Jermaine Pratt lined up on the line of scrimmage a lot this past season, this past game. He lined up on the line of scrimmage. He came off the edge. Jermaine Pratt also played a little bit at that stack position, and Pratt actually looked really, really, really good to me as well. It wasn't just Jamal Adams. Jermaine Pratt, in my opinion, did a really good job. In pass coverage situations, Jermaine Pratt did a good job gaining depth, kind of getting, it was a cover three, kind of getting back far enough where he was able to kind of take things away. On the other side of it, Landon Roberts was really, 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 really bad. To me, I don't even know if I would say I think he's a candidate to be released. Now, obviously, we paid him some money, so he might end up just kind of making the roster. But the guy had a missed tackle. He had two really, really, really poor coverage reps. One of these was just head scratcher as hell because, he took the guy initially and then he just kind of let him go. And that guy picked up almost 20 yards. that's a head scratching ass play. Now you can coach him out of that, of course. But then you have this other play as well where there was a guy that would have probably scored a touchdown. And this isn't just on Landon Roberts. This is on Devin White as well, who's the other linebacker. But in cover 3, you got to see this and then you got to carry it, right? Unless the rule is not there, which that'd be head scratcher to me. You know, cover 3, the way to beat it is essentially run guys across the middle of the field, because then those linebackers have to cover those guys, right? They have to carry those guys. Neither of the Raiders linebackers carried them, and the Landon Roberts is right there, right? So to me, those are head scratching plays, and you got the missed tackles. And he didn't play a whole lot of snaps anyways in that, right? Roberts. And, you know, another interesting thing that I didn't know, and I don't know if it was because he had these bad reps or if the Raiders just feel this way. Roberts did not play when the Raiders got into nickel defense. Jermaine Pratt and Devin White were the 2 linebackers that stayed on the field in nickel defense. And even Devin White, I know he had that head scratcher play where him and Roberts kind of let that guy go, but he did a good job on a couple other plays where he carried his guy across the field, right? He stayed right on top of this guy, right underneath, I should say. Devin White looked good to me, right? He did have a couple missed tackles, but those are things you kind of just clean up. He was kind of getting blocked as he was trying to make the tackle. Jamal Adams, I think, should be a starting linebacker for the Raiders, and Pete Carroll talked a little bit about him. Pete Carroll said, I thought Jamal Adams was pretty flashy. Like, he's been in practice. He's played like he's been practicing. He's been really obvious out there. He's real sudden. He's always been a very aggressive, attack-oriented player. That's what separated him from others in the past. I thought he looked good and ran well, and I was really happy for him. Jamal Adams, to me, should be a starting linebacker for the Raiders. Now, I could see him not starting given the fact that, you know, as a linebacker, you got to be able to play in between the tackles, not just sideline to sideline. The Seahawks ran a ton of outside zone concepts. So Jamal Adams didn't have to take on offensive linemen. He got to chase because they're outside zone concepts. So he got to run down the line of scrimmage. He didn't have to get physical and play in between the tackles. So I can see if we play a team that's like a heavy, heavy power team, I could see him potentially struggling a little bit in those instances. But I think Jamal Adams right now should be the Raiders' third string linebacker at the very, very, very least. I think at this point, the Raiders probably like Jermaine Pratt the most. I think he's going to play every single down for the Raiders. I think Jamal Adams should be right there, right, as like the second guy, but I can see why Devin White might get that nod right now. I'd be shocked if Landon Roberts starts. I would be. I just don't see it. Didn't really impress me at all. I even think long term, how much upside really is there with the Landon Roberts? We'll see what ends up happening, but I do hope that Jamal Adams gets that opportunity. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, man. Thumbs up, subscribe if you guys are not subscribed. I just realized, or I just looked up the stats. 35% of you guys are not subscribed, which is crazy. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. I obviously do appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time with another video.